Well, great. Well, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thanks so much for joining us today. Really excited to do the second Switchboard Refugee Employment webinar. Our topic today is helping clients overcome employment barriers. And this is something that I know that we all think about and talk about a lot every day, probably. Today, hopefully, we're going to take a little bit different angle on it and look at what does it mean to have a strengths-based approach to helping clients overcome employment barriers. My name is Daniel Wilkinson. I'm a program manager for economic empowerment at LIRS, and I work with our partners at the IRC on the Switchboard program. I'm also excited to have Hillary Francis with me today. She's going to be our guest speaker, and I just want to take a minute to introduce her. Hillary Francis is a workforce development consultant whose work focuses on activating talent in marginalized populations, including homeless youth, refugees and immigrants, and young adults who have not succeeded in traditional schools or workplaces. Hillary's previous experience includes serving as the Dean of Adult Education and the Language Learning Center at Emily Griffith Technical College in Denver, Colorado, as well as the Training and Employment Coordinator at the Colorado Refugee Services Program, where she worked with Colorado's resettlement agency employment teams to improve employment outcomes for the state. Hillary is also the co-founder of Prodigy Coffee House, which is run by young adults who have not previously succeeded in school or work and are now participating in an apprentice. Hillary holds a master's degree in international and intercultural communications from the University of Denver. So really excited to have Hillary with us today for this topic. Just a couple tech tips before we get started here. If you're having any problems with the audio on your computer, you can also call in by phone. And I put both the dial-in number as well as the audio pin right there on the screen for you if you need to do that. As we go through the presentation today, feel free to type your questions into the chat box at any time. I'm going to be monitoring those throughout Hillary's presentation, and we're going to have a Q&A time at the end where we can go through some of those. I know sometimes people attend as groups, and maybe not everybody's registered. So in case you're attending with a group and haven't registered, if you could just type your name in the chat along with your email, or send us that information to switchboard@rescue.org. Finally, somebody always asks if the webinar recordings and slides will be shared. The answer is yes. We will post those things at switchboardta.org, and I'll also send out some follow-up resources via email. Hopefully by now you guys are all familiar with Switchboard, but just in case, just wanted to give a quick run through on what Switchboard is. Switchboard is a one-stop resource hub for refugee service providers in the United States. We offer tools, materials, learning opportunities, research, technical assistance, and on refugee resettlement related topics. Switchboard is funded by the Office for Refugee Resettlement, and it's implemented by the IRC, the International Rescue Committee. The IRC has partnered with LIRS, where I work, to provide employment-related training and technical assistance. And you can learn more about Switchboard at switchboardta.org. As far as today's learning objectives, really what we want to do today is, as I said earlier, really begin to articulate a strengths-based approach to helping clients navigate employment barriers. Talking about barriers often ends up, kind of talking about deficiencies that our clients might have, but we want to talk about what are the strengths that they have, and how can those strengths help them navigate those barriers, which are very real. Secondly, we want to identify new approaches to common barriers to employment, including limited English proficiency, logistical barriers, and lack of job skills and credentials. And Hillary's presentation is going to focus specifically on those three things, but we're also happy to talk during the Q&A about some of the other barriers that come up as well. Finally, we hope that you walk away with best practices taken from real refugee employment case studies. There's going to be some some really good examples throughout the presentation. And so hopefully you'll find those things helpful and encouraging and walk away with some new ideas. All right, so I'm gonna hand things over to Hillary, and she's gonna get started with our presentation, Helping Clients Overcome Employment Barriers, a Strengths-Based Approach. Go ahead, Hillary.
Thanks so much, Daniel, and thanks everybody for being here. It is an honor to be with you today. I'm eager to discuss this topic because it has been the privilege of my life to work with refugees on their employment journey and to work with agencies and organizations like you who support refugee employment. I've often defaulted to thinking that my best work is the work that is measured by placements, when really I forget that my best work is measured in the number of moments where refugees discovered or rediscovered their own brilliance. So this is a perfect topic for me today. I'm excited about it. All right. Oops. Just going to get us back one more slide here. All right. And I think this is really the essence of what strengths-based approaches mean, that we would recruit clients as allies in finding the best solution to overcoming their own employment barriers. I use the word recruit because I think sometimes refugees need to be pulled into believing that they are powerful players in the job search. The world really sets up our relationships to be power-based, where the person on the other side of the desk represents a different level of power than the other. So we need to disrupt that norm and make it normal for refugees to feel a part of overcoming their employment barriers. This is different from a deficit-based approach, which comes from an unintentional belief that our client is missing critical assets in order to succeed in the job market, and that it will benefit them to follow our instructions. We all have examples of scenarios where we noticed a critical asset was missing and needed to be addressed before sending the client out into the workplace. But we've all gone into our jobs without certain critical assets. I know I have. So our work today is to consider what mindset we begin with and to ask ourselves the hard question, what do I really believe about my client's capacity to overcome their barriers? Sorry for the brief pause here. I'm working on getting you to the next slide. Okay, so I'd like to share 3 examples of different strengths-based models for doing human services work in general. There are more, but I bring up these 3 because I think they're the most interesting for us today. First, we have motivational interviewing, which many of you or some of you may have heard of or are working with. This is a technique used mainly in behavioral health to work with people who are struggling with a difficulty that involves change. We're talking about overcoming an addiction, losing weight, taking medication on schedule, and finding employment. William Miller is one of the founding researchers of motivational interviewing, and he says that it is a collaborative conversation style for strengthening a person's own motivation and commitment to change. The Colorado Refugee Services Program contracted with an expert to train resettlement staff in using motivational interviewing several years ago, and I'd love to hear if some of you around the country have used this method as well. Second, mobility mentoring is a model designed by the Economic Mobility Pathways organization in Boston and is based on brain science as it relates to poverty. They studied the impact of chronic stress that comes with poverty, and then they built a case management approach that takes brain science into account. Coaches acknowledge the way that poverty has impacted their clients' brains, and they work to recruit them as allies in achieving their goals. They have a track record of doubling clients' income within 3 to 5 years of working with them. It's an organization I followed for several years and really worth looking into. They have several research papers that are easy to read. I recommend that you check them out. And then we have narrative therapy. I want to talk about the spirit of narrative therapy as a framework for thinking about your conversations rather than a formal type of therapy. This is the idea that we can separate people from their problems by asking people to tell their story in such a way as to understand the struggles they've overcome already. You can use this, or you already use this when you ask the question, tell me about the work you've done in the past, and then you sit back and listen to their story. So in short, I think when I think about strengths-based approaches to anything, these formulas for working with people stand out to me. And so if I were to summarize them into one idea, I would tell you that the best strengths-based work I've seen rests on an authentic belief that the person sitting across from you has capacity for transformative results. Strength-based doesn't mean that I acknowledge or just nod to your strengths only. That's part of it. But it means that I commit to excavating, to looking for your strengths, so that I can then rely on your strengths to overcome this obstacle. I'd like to ask you to think about this in your own life for a minute. So if you could, think of a time someone not only recognized your strengths, but relied on them to help you overcome an obstacle. What did you overcome as a result? It's a little bit of a tricky question, but I know that some of you have some ideas on the top of your head. So go ahead and type them into the box, and I'm curious what experiences people might be able to share briefly. As you're thinking, just know that it's really meant to give us a chance to think about how it might have felt to have your strengths relied on, and then how can we create that same experience for someone else. When you have a moment later, you can think about not just the circumstances that led to that experience for you, but what did the other person say or do or not say that made you feel like they were relying on your strengths?
Hillary, I have an example here that
Okay.
somebody shared. Sylvia said that one of my first employers helped build my confidence, challenged me, and weirdly enough supported me when I applied for a job elsewhere.
That's perfect. Thanks, Sylvia. Yeah. And so the idea is to internalize that feeling that you had when somebody relied on your strengths, which will fuel the work that you do with others. Thank you for sharing that. Okay, I think we will dive in. And we're going to dive into applying a strengths-based approach to our employment barriers. And again, another question for you. I want to start by getting a sense for the employment barriers you're facing today. Please go ahead and select which of these barriers that you see on the slide is most common or most difficult for you today. And this is going to be a poll question. So Daniel's going to share a poll for you to fill out instead of typing it into the chat box. We'll give you a
And you
couple
guys should
minutes.
see that poll now. All right, we have some responses coming in so far. Limited English proficiency is in first place with logistical barriers in second, but they're kind of neck and neck.
Okay.
We'll give you guys a few more seconds to lock in your response. All right, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I'm going to close this poll now.
Okay.
All right, let's share the results.
Yep. Is that what you thought it would be, Daniel?
Yeah, I mean, pretty close. I know English ability is always one of the major concerns, and logistical barriers like transportation, childcare is a close second. So that's pretty
Mhm,
consistent with what I've seen. And then the other things are clearly significant as well.
mhm.
But oftentimes we do a pretty good job at helping people. I would say at least with cultural and emotional barriers, helping people navigate those. But those first two are pretty tricky.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
Yep. Yep. And the good news is today we're going to be covering these first three in exactly this order. We couldn't have predicted that, but there you go. So we're
Yeah.
going to start by talking briefly about limited English proficiency. Okay. All right. So the strategies for supporting limited English proficiency, or LEP as it's sometimes abbreviated, starts with leveraging what we already have. First, the language that clients already speak can be a strength if you can place them at a job where they can communicate speaking their first language, which we know is easier said than done. Then sometimes stronger English speakers are hired as shift leads to support those with weaker English skills. This is what we are calling leveraging community. We all know that some clients' technology skills can be leveraged for language learning, interpretation, etc. And then we have integrated education and training, which includes integrated basic education and skills training, or IBEST. These are workforce development programs that allow students to acquire language skills while also studying toward a certificate. Many IET programs have been implemented across the country. Washington State is best known for developing the IBEST model, which, as you may know, sets up classrooms with two teachers, the subject area expert, like a CNA instructor, and a language or adult education instructor. They're co-teaching the same course. We point this out because IET is maybe one of the most efficient strengths-based means of helping students overcome language barriers and find employment. It cuts out valuable time and money spent on progressing through higher and higher levels of English, earning prerequisites, and passing entrance tests before starting certificate programs. Also, we've found that students' language learning accelerates when it's contextualized within a topic that interests them. I encourage you to find out if there are IET programs at the community or technical college you work with, and if not, maybe you can talk to them about getting one started. So next, what does a strengths-based approach look like when it comes to logistics? There are many logistical barriers that we deal with every day, and there are almost as many ideas for overcoming them. Some of the more strengths-based approaches are those that tap into resources within the refugee community. So in terms of transportation, I learned that 3 years ago, a cohort of employment specialists in Idaho worked with the regional transit office, Valley Regional Transit, near Boise, or including Boise, to create a program that split the cost of a van between the region through federal transit funding and two major employers. There are 3 vans running with 40 employees today in that partnership. In addition, Valley Regional Transit recently set up a partnership with Lyft to provide $3 fixed fare trips for refugees to get from home to work-related activities for up to 48 trips per month. And they received a grant from a local foundation and matched it with federal transit funds to launch that program. The Helping Clients Overcome Employment Barriers information guide that Switchboard just released contains several other examples of strengths-based solutions for transportation, including community navigation, bicycle donation programs, helping clients obtain driver's licenses, etc. And as we've seen, I think that one of the key aspects here is developing cross-sector partnerships to bring solutions to these logistical barriers. Next, I want to talk briefly about childcare. Aside from tapping into community members looking for jobs that allow parents to rotate childcare duties or jobs that are located within proximity of childcare centers. There are some innovative micro-enterprise grantees who are creating home-based childcare programs and giving us a model for what strength-based looks like when it comes to childcare. I'd encourage you to look at ORR's list of 2019 grantees for this funding and see who is closest to you that you could reach out to learn more. Okay. Finally, on the topic of logistical barriers, I'll briefly describe an exercise I developed which asks clients to remember ways that they have solved logistical problems in the past. In an employment class or even one-on-one, you can ask your client to think of a time they solved a problem in the past. Encourage them that it can be a big or a small problem, but that you want them to remember the way they came up with a solution. And then ask if you can record them telling the story of how they solved this problem. Reflect on how their previous solution relates to their current problem. When they tell the stories and you record them, they're using their voices to advocate for themselves. I'm going to play an example from a job club that happened a few years ago at ECDC's African Community Center in Denver. And just so you know, we removed the woman's name for anonymity.
I give you one example. One day I was to Congo. I was go to there work. I taken the bus. This day there is not a bus. In my house, I have one bicycle. I need to go to my work. I think, let me go at my house, take my bicycle. You reach there and walk. Yeah, I was take my bicycle. I was go to there and walk. I finish my work. I take my bicycle. I go back to my home. There is one counseling I give you, not to wait. Agents come help me. Maybe for thing in water, you can wait to when someone you come help you. No, you self you can create anything.
This is one of my favorite examples, and I would say too that the story could be told in the client's first language. It doesn't necessarily need to be told in English, if that helps. It's only a way of reminding clients of their ability to overcome and to make the connection that the same power that overcame that obstacle in the past can be used for this particular barrier today. And so the last barrier that we're going to address is lack of job skills or credentials. I want to point out here that it's common to use this language, lack of job skills or credentials. But in my experience, even a teenager from Sudan who never held an official job in Sudan has job skills and credentials. It's the role of job development to reframe the conversation so that employers see our candidates as uniquely useful to their businesses. And at the same time, we work to help refugees identify the job skills that already exist within them. So our first goal is to determine if the job skills and credentials for the open position are negotiable. Often we run into barriers imposed by employers who don't understand what they really need to get the job done well at their company. And we already talked about IET as a way of accelerating acquisition of credentials. And I would say this is the #1 solution on the table right now if the credential is non-negotiable. Because as we said, in the best scenarios through IET, a refugee can start on a path to obtaining a credential before traditional prerequisites have been met. Also, there's credential evaluation that can prevent refugees from having to completely start over. Be sure to find out if your local community college taps into Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, WIOA dollars, which may provide funding for your client's courses or even the fees to have the credentials evaluated. And then for higher skilled clients, don't be afraid to tap into your partner organizations that may specialize in placements for foreign trained professionals. Sometimes we're hesitant to hand our client over to someone else for placement, but partners like Upwardly Global, Global Talent Bridge, and other similar teams can tap into resources on your behalf. And after we've done the work to reduce job skill barriers, we're sometimes still left with a gap between the requirements of the jobs available and the skills our clients possess. Sometimes it's hard to explain why a job doesn't seem like a good fit. This can trigger even traumatic experience of feelings of loss and grief and powerlessness. One way I have found to work with this from a strength-based perspective, and this works especially for lower level English speakers, is to create visual resumes that identify the skills refugees have from their home countries. Each skill is represented by a picture, either that they draw or that they pull from a pile of sketches. And the examples are here: I can clean, I can work on cars, I can care for children. You can add anything, including I can manage democratic elections. The sky is the limit for the skills. And then after they've created a visual resume, we present available jobs in a format that visually illustrates the necessary skills for the job. So imagine a job title at the top of a page or your whiteboard, and then pictures of the skills needed below it. You ask refugees to match the skills with the available jobs. In this way, they are participating in the decision-making process to determine whether or not a job is a good fit for their skill level. They can visually see if it's matching or not. Rather than just flat out telling them it won't work, they can look at the jobs that match and don't match their skills. And I'll say at the same time, your job development team, or yourselves if you do job development, should be referencing the resumes that your clients have created to ensure that they're developing jobs that match the skills that your clients have as well. So in conclusion, let me ask you this question. Which strengths-based approach to employment barriers would you like your organization to spend more time considering in 2019? This is just an exercise of setting an intention. You're not committing to anything. It's also fine to type something into the chat box if you don't see your favorite option on this slide.
And I just launched the poll, Hillary.
Thank you.
All right, we still have responses coming in. We'll give just a few more seconds. All right, I'm going to go ahead and close this poll and share the results.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so you're interested in IET or iBest, and also exercises that help clients self-identify their best job match. Yeah, I will say that watching that activity, and I'd be curious of what other activities folks have done, it was a very powerful way to see a sense of having power in the situation, that it's not just up to my employment specialist to match me with jobs, but I am a part of this matching process as well. Thank you. Like I said, it's just important to choose something. It doesn't matter which one it is. It only matters that you're setting an intention. So thank you. And so now we're actually going to move straight into questions. This is my favorite part of the presentation because I want to hear from you. I'm eager to hear some of your thoughts and have maybe a brief dialogue about this important topic. I think we're going to use the chat box for this. So I am ready whenever you are.
Yep, that's right. So we've gotten a couple questions in, but I'm hoping that more of you have questions to ask on this topic. So I'll go ahead and read our first one, Hillary. This is from Kritzia, And she said, can we get more information about the grants that were provided for the transportation partnership?
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for that. And I was hoping you would ask because Idaho has, and maybe if you are from Idaho and you'd like to speak to this, you're welcome to chime in. But they have an ally within the regional transit office who has been working to do grant writing on their behalf. So they have a local foundation that helped fund the LIFT program, but they're also leveraging its, what did she say? It is federal transit dollars, and that's as specific as I have for you. But I can also share with you, she said she'd be more than willing to be a resource to anyone who wants to learn more. So Daniel, somehow I can get her contact info to folks.
Yeah, I think if we can, I'm going to send out a follow-up email with resources that we shared today, and we can check and see if they're open to having their contact info included, or if there's been any articles or anything that they could share on those partnerships.
Yep, that sounds great.
Awesome. So let's see here. We have another question. Wow, several just came in all at once. Okay, so this one is from Lauren. Lauren says, the big challenge we face is that there's never enough time to think strategically about our activities. We operate on a putting out fires model more than anything. Do you have any recommendations for finding time to put some of these models in place when time is very limited? Great question.
Yeah, that is a great question. I think that is going to be completely dependent on your staffing model, and if there's a way to maybe rotate who's on call for putting out fires on different days so that everyone could have maybe at least a couple hours a week to think through innovative new strategies or activities that you'd like to implement. But I think that is a perennial issue for everyone in this field. I think the teams that I've seen that have been able to be most innovative do build in at least time in their schedule for meetings that get folks together to think about or practice implementing these strategies. But that does leave chaos happening in the background, and so I guess it's a matter of tolerance for that level of time spent. If anyone has examples of how you've built in time for creativity and innovation, please feel free to chat that in as well. I'd love to hear it.
Great, thanks, Hillary. Matthew asks, have you seen examples of resources that help case managers practice using strengths-based strategies with clients? I'll take this opportunity to plug a couple Switchboard resources that we published recently. The first one was a toolkit called Job Counseling for Career Pathways, which we published about a month ago or 6 weeks ago, I think. And the second one is the one that we're releasing kind of in tandem with this webinar on overcoming employment barriers, helping clients overcome employment barriers. And it's not necessarily going to go like super deep into the theory of the strengths-based model, but they were definitely, both of those resources were created with the strengths-based framework in mind. And I would just say, as a network, I'm sure that we have some experts out there, but a lot of us are learning to frame these issues differently. And so we're kind of moving in that direction and sort of providing some introductory resources. But Hillary, are you aware of other reports or resources that might, give more, specific activities to do or that kind of thing?
I think I love that you shared your toolkit. I think that it would be, yes, there are resources. Depends on what strategy you're most interested in. So the 3 strategies that I started off the presentation with, motivational interviewing, mobility mentoring, and narrative therapy, each of those would have resources that you could follow. or try. And in fact, the mobility mentoring has some great white papers, some research papers they've written that illustrate what it actually looks like in the day-to-day. And they have videos on their website, and they also, if your organization is really keen on it, they have a network of nonprofits who are implementing their model across the country, and they provide training to their network. They have special conferences for their network, and it's essentially a skill building and resource sharing opportunity. So I'd say choose which strategy you would like to practice, and then we can point you in the right direction for resources.
Yeah, just since we were on that note, I thought I would just put the recommended resources slide up so you can, if you want to jot down some of those, the names of the resources that we just mentioned. You can definitely find the first two on Switchboard's website, and the mobility mentoring report. You can probably Google that, but I'll also include it as an attachment when I send out the follow-up resources. Hillary, I had a question for you, something we discussed as we were preparing. My background is in job development within a refugee resettlement agency, and not necessarily, I haven't done the same kind of work you have in terms of, especially your experience at Emily Griffith Technical College. And, so I wasn't as familiar with the IET model. And so I was concerned, well, is that only something for higher skilled clients or those who are able to get certifications? And I was very concerned about making sure that we talk about strengths-based models for the folks on the lower end of the English and skill spectrum. But you assured me that IET actually does have some things to help that group as well. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. And so IET is really a large umbrella concept for adult education that's integrated with workforce readiness. And I'm going to talk about the IBEST model specifically within that, which is it has several different ways of doing it, but the one that I'm most excited about is the co-teaching model. So with this, and again, it differs across the whole country, but there are examples of courses that are taught by like I said, a content area expert and then a language instructor, so that you could have very low level English speakers in the same moment they're launching their training in a particular certification, as well as building their English skills. And this happens rapidly because it's contextualized, so they're learning English quicker than if they were just sitting in an English classroom. Again, I'd love to hear what folks across the country are implementing in terms of IBEST, but I know in Denver, the first IBEST pilot at Emily Griffith was a culinary quick start training. So this is basic kitchen safety and food prep, with the intention of being placed in positions as a line cook. And I don't remember exactly the level of English that was required, but I think it was not advanced. It may have even been beginner or low intermediate in terms of generalities. But that model is flexible and has tons of room for creativity. So I think that folks would have other examples of how it's being applied to all levels of English speakers.
Great, and we're getting several questions on IET and IBEST, and I'm trying to sort of combine some of them because we're not going to be able to get to every single question today, unfortunately. But some of them have to do with partnerships, with developing these partnerships. Not every organization out there has partnered with their community college, for example, or with other providers of these programs. What advice would you give in terms of getting those partnerships off the ground?
Yeah, so if you haven't partnered with your community or technical college, I would say that the very best way to start that arrangement is to see if your state agency or some sort of organization that supports refugee resettlement across the state or across your region could help you broker that relationship, because it's likely it's in everyone's best interest for there to be a collaboration rather than you just starting it yourself for your own agency. I think if there could be a cohort of resettlement agencies that work together to establish that together with the technical college, either yourselves as a cohort or through the state, that would be the best way to get started, I think.
Great, thanks, Hillary. We had a question about overcoming barriers for higher skilled clients trying to get back into their profession, whatever that might be. And I know that we also had a conversation about the way that trauma can intersect with some of that. Do you want to talk about that just for a few minutes?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that your higher skilled professionals may be feeling the greatest sense of loss of their professional identity, which for all of us is an incredible part of our sense of self. And the potentially the higher positions that they have held in their home country equates to the higher level of trauma that they experience when that has been taken from them or is not easily reconnected. So I think that this is probably the most difficult emotional experience for you in your work, is to stand with somebody as they have felt this loss. Practical ways to work with it are all of the partnerships that you could build for these folks, starting with those organizations that specialize in high skilled professionals. If you don't know who that is or you don't have one in your area, I would encourage you to look at global, Upwardly Global and World Education Services, and there are webinars and resources on this particular topic all the time. Imprint is another one, and they offer conferences, resources, training. I think that the national movement on this front is really powerful and exciting. There are a lot of people who are doing national policy work to help with credential reevaluation and setting up relationships between foreign trained professionals and credentialing boards in different fields. But then there are also really grassroots things that you can work toward, like mentoring programs. So career mentoring is possibly one of the best ways to get foreign trained professionals integrated into the professional networks that exist in your area, where you can match somebody who's a professional in their work in your town or your city with the same kind of foreign trained professional. And there are models for creating that as a formal mentoring relationship, but even informally, the connection can be the best way to get somebody hired in their field is to know somebody in their field. And also that local professional will know when they talk to a civil engineer from Iraq, for example, they'll know what they did in their home country, and it'll make more sense to them than it would to you, because they're speaking the field language. And so that is a very powerful way to not only connect them to jobs because of the shared professional network, but also to rebuild their emotional strength after that loss.
Great, thanks. We have. I think this is a good question, Hillary. This is from Rachel. One of the biggest barriers we have seen recently for our clients has been low confidence, especially in regards to job qualifications. This has been most prevalent in the women we serve. Have you encountered any promising innovations in empowering this group for the workforce? So in general, and also for women specifically.
Yeah, I think that social enterprise is maybe one of the best ways to build confidence for folks maybe re-entering the workforce or entering it for the first time in the United States. So I'm thinking of all of our women's arts and handcrafts cooperatives that you may have heard of and been connected to across the country. There are several that make, there's beading and sewing and baking and all of those sorts of opportunities to use a skill that is familiar from their home country, but also to earn money doing it. And when I say social enterprise, I mean the business is also run by a nonprofit. So the nonprofit supports the employees, the women maybe in particular, as they're working on building the business skills that would go along with their skill that they've had from their home country. So imagine someone with low confidence starting out in a social enterprise where they have some supportive people working with them on getting out of the house. Maybe there's bus tickets are provided and they come to the office and they ride with their friends on the bus and they gradually release responsibility to those women to then go out and find employment outside of that social enterprise.
Great, thanks, Hillary. We have a question here about managing expectations. That was one of the things, one of the barriers we didn't get into as much is emotional barriers. And one of those can be managing expectations with clients. And so encountering situations where clients might not want to take certain jobs because they have a certain expectation. What does it look like to be strengths-based in those kinds of situations? I certainly could share thoughts, but Hillary, do you have thoughts on this?
Yeah, I'd love to hear yours too. But yeah, I think that the visual resume was also designed to help with managing expectations. So on the resume, you see the skills that you identify your skills and you put them on this page. And then you have a way of managing expectations because you can tell the client that the jobs have to match. So if you want to be a bus driver and you do not have any bus driving skills on your page, then that isn't possible. It also motivates them to want to find out, how do I add this bus picture onto my page if it's not here? I want to be a bus driver, the bus is not on my page, what do I need to do? And so it's it narrows in the focus to what is on my page, what is on the board, and I need those to match. Daniel, there was another part of the question that I'm spacing, but did you want to comment on that one as well?
Yeah, I actually, what came to mind was an interview I did a few years ago with Carrie Teeley, who's also out in Colorado, and she talked about integrating client choice, which I think is just another way of saying strengths-based, and how simply, we have to acknowledge that these are adults that we're working with. And of course, in the early employment programs like Matching Grant, this is harder to do. But explaining people's options, sometimes mapping out the pathway, trying to find that way to balance, being supportive and supporting people in their goals and dreams, but also being realistic. But I think if you can offer a few options and say, okay, well, these are the options and these are the potential consequences of choosing, good or bad, of choosing this path or this path or this path, and you're free to do that. You're an adult, letting them make the choice. And sometimes people have to go through a process where they're not ready to take something that they feel is beneath them or something, but maybe over time, either they will get to a point where they're ready, or maybe you'll actually find a job that maybe isn't their perfect job, but maybe is a little closer to what they were looking for and leverages their skills a little bit better.
Yeah, and I also remembered the visual resumes also had, beyond skills, they also had preferences. So going along with the choice, they had preferences for like time of day that I could work, proximity to home. So there was a picture of a sun and a moon for day and night. Again, this is for lower level speakers, and you can adopt this for any level of English speaker. And the preferences also were illustrated in the job options. So if a job required night shifts, then it would not have daytime images on it. So again, allowing them to see their preferences. If they have way too many preferences on their sheet, the preferences prevent them from having any matches on the board. And then they need to eliminate some of their preferences. So it's just a very visual way of seeing the way that their preferences can narrow their choices too significantly. Does that make sense? I'm not
Yeah.
sure. Yeah.
No, that was great. All right. Well, thank you so much for all of your questions, and I'm sorry, Christia, that the audio didn't work out there for you to be able to share your story. But hopefully we can continue the conversation. Definitely, if there's something we didn't cover, feel free to submit a technical assistance request to Switchboard at switchboardta.org. You can do that. You can also, when I send out the follow-up email, if you're not able to find where to submit a TA request, you can just ask me in a follow-up reply to my email, and I'm happy to help you with that. But we're going to go ahead and wrap up today. We wanted to give you an opportunity to provide some feedback. We have a survey link here, and I'm also going to include this in the follow-up email as well. But if you wouldn't mind taking a few minutes to fill out this survey, we would really appreciate that. And I hope that today has been helpful for you. And just to let you know how you can contact us, here's our email address and Twitter and website. And so hopefully we can stay connected. Please, if you get a chance today, go on our website. I know that the new toolkit for overcoming employment barriers was just published either yesterday or today, and so it's brand new, fresh, and hopefully will provide some helpful ideas in the same 5 categories that were on that earlier poll. And so it covers limited English proficiency, lack of job skills and credentials, emotional barriers, and logistical barriers, and cultural norms and religious beliefs. And so take a few minutes to look at that over a lunch break this week or something. Let us know if you have feedback, if you have success stories. We always want to hear about those. And just want to take a minute to thank Hillary for joining us. Thanks so much for contributing your expertise to our network, and hope everybody has a great day.
Thanks, everybody.